Hello, welcome to the Midnight Bible Study. Extreme prayer of the saints. That's the topic of today's report. In the 4th century, St. Paul the Hermit, before he was known as St. Paul the Hermit, he began his life as a rich young man in Thebes. But you're Catholic, persecution can be a major problem. And he was a rich young man in Thebes, but then when the persecution came to town, he fled to the desert to get away from the persecutions. And he spent a lot of time there until when the persecutions finally ended, he decided not to go back. And what happened was he had come to love the solitary life so much that he just never returned. He stayed in the desert. And he once said, "Woe to me, a sinner who falsely bears the name of monk. I have seen Elias. I have seen John in the desert, and in truth I have seen Paul in paradise." He spent his life in prayer, and at his death St. Anthony found his body kneeling in prayer in his cave. But what's the point of all this prayer? Some people might wonder, what's the point of all this prayer? We all need prayer. We all need people praying for us. It can be a matter of life and death. It could be a matter of salvation or something else. Literally our lives are upheld, our societies are upheld by prayer. If everyone wasn't praying, everything might just turn to darkness. We might have, in fact, the kind of persecutions that St. Paul fled, they might come to our town. They might overtake our country in darkness. So prayer is essential. The Hermit Sisters of Mary, they spend their lives in prayer even today. And they take prayer requests for people to pray for. They will pray for people. So even today, it's essential that people pray, not just the Hermit Sisters of Mary, but others as well. But prayer is essential. Now, Pedro Arrupe was the leader of the Jesuits, but in the 1980s he had a debilitating stroke, and in his final years he was dependent on others for his care. So where he had once served God through bold prophetic leadership, he transformed to serve God through prayer and patient suffering. And he set an example of there's a quote, finding God in all things. Catherine of Siena, in the 14th century in Italy, she resisted an arranged marriage, and said she told her family she was going to marry Christ instead, and they didn't take it well at all. In fact, they retaliated against her, making her a servant, like she became some kind of Cinderella. However, Christ showed her how to construct her like a cell within herself, like a cell as a place to pray and commune. Like the monks have cells, little areas for prayer. And she could retreat to this cell within herself from her daily drudgery. One day her father saw her kneeling in prayer with her head bowed, and he said there was a dove hovering over her head. And at that point he relented. He consented to her vocation. And however, rather than entering a formal religious order, she put on the habit of a Dominican tertiary, and she said, "My cell will not be one of stone and wood, but of self-knowledge." Now, in a vision, Christ told her more about this. He said, "Know, daughter, that I am he who is, and thou art that which is not." And her whole understanding of spiritual life developed from this simple formula. So for 3 years, she remained enclosed in her room. During this time, she was tormented by voices, doubts, and demons. But she persisted in prayer. Finally, she banished them with laughter. After this, she received daily visitations from Christ, sometimes in the company of Mary Magdalene and other saints. Now, in the 18th century, an Italian monk, Saint Divini, was a blind, crippled prayer warrior. At the age of 35, he lost his sight and hearing and became crippled. At the Friary of San Severino in 1705, he spent the rest of his life in prayer, fasting, and mortifications. The rest of his life in prayer, fasting, and mortifications. He was venerated for his ecstasies, for his holiness, and for the gift of prophecy. Now, Pedro Arrupe is an extraordinary story. The story of Pedro Arrupe is incredible. Arrupe entered the Jesuits in 1927. And in 1945, he found himself as a priest in Nagasaki. In Hiroshima. He was in Hiroshima, but that's not a good place to be. Either one of those places. You don't want to be there in 1945, especially in August, because that's when they dropped the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. And he was there. He was right 4 miles from the epicenter. He was 4 miles from the epicenter when the blast wave collapsed the walls of his church, and he felt it. He felt it. And it says Arrupe, he was close enough to be nearly blinded by the flash. And to feel that blast that sent the walls of the seminary crashing down around him. The memory of that day and the suffering survivors whom he tended in the following weeks was present with him in each Mass he celebrated for the rest of his life. What a memory to carry with him for the rest of his life, and be thinking of that during every Mass that he celebrated. Incredible story. And then there's Padre Pio. Padre Pio is one of the great saints. Now, he's been referred to as the living rosary. This is a rosary. If you don't know, Catholics pray this. It's a meditation. It's a meditation on the Gospels. It's a prayer of meditation on the Gospels of Christ. Now, he prayed it constantly. Padre Pio prayed this rosary constantly throughout the day. If you actually look at the rosary, you've got these decades of these 10 groups of 10 beads, and for each one of these you pray a Hail Mary. But at the same time you're praying the Hail Mary, you're focusing on Christ being crucified, or Christ preaching the gospel, or Christ praying at the Garden of Gethsemane, or that kind of thing. The whole gospel, as you're meditating on it. So it takes about a half an hour to, maybe a little less than that, about a half an hour to pray a rosary of 50 Hail Marys, 10 decades. So they called Padre Pio, he prayed it constantly throughout the day. He always had a rosary in his hand. And they called him a living rosary. And one day, his religious superior asked him how many rosaries he had prayed that day. And his answer was 34. 34. I did the math on that. That would take approximately 17 hours if you didn't take a break. So it could have been more like 19 hours. That's probably why they called him a living rosary. He called it his weapon. It was a weapon of spiritual warfare. He understood it to be a powerful spiritual weapon, able to overcome theological errors and false political regimes. Gee, I wonder why we, in America, for example, we have, the political regimes that we get. If everyone was praying the rosary, we wouldn't have the same problem of voting and the same problems that we have. Now, Padre Pio is so extraordinary. He actually bilocated. He was known for bilocations. Not only did he take constant confessions, but he was known for bilocating to other, being two places at one kind. It's this. If you don't know, that's called that's a miracle, right? So he on several occasions he bilocated to the prison cell of another great champion of the Rosary, Joseph Cardinal Minzenzi. Now, he was imprisoned for the cardinal was imprisoned for radical opposition to communism, and he was a Hungarian prelate who frequently preached the Rosary, which was his secret weapon of the Catholic Church against communism. So there you go. Those are a number of saints who there are many more, but those are just a handful of saints who are known for extreme prayers. We all need to be praying every day and praying for each other. It's been said that by a saint that those who pray daily will be saved, and those who don't pray will not be saved. So prayer is essential. It's absolutely essential. God bless you. Good night from the Midnight Bible Study.